Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Are you ready? Let's go do this. Hey, welcome to another Wednesday Wisdom. Sue here. I don't know if today is going to be more of wisdom or rant, but let's jump into it. I'm sure you've heard of the phrase, don't get me started, right? So you're sitting around and you're listening to people, whether you're at work, you're home or whatever, and you hear somebody say, oh, don't get me started on that. Don't get me started complaining about what that person did. Don't get me started about how things aren't going the way I wanted them to. Don't get me started, fill in the blank, right? Don't get me started on that. And there's a lot of energy around that phrase, don't get me started, because it wells up something inside where a complaint is about to ensue or a challenge is about to happen. Something that's, generally, if you think about it, don't get me started usually has something to do about a situation or circumstance that is outside of you. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, don't get me started on how lousy of a job I did last week on that project. I don't think anybody would default to going into a rant on don't get me started on something that you did, right? So let's start with that premise, don't get me started blank, and then that thing is happening out there. I wanted to offer a different perspective on don't get me started. I was really thinking about this, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of energy around that phrase, don't get me started. So if you find yourself thinking about that and you're about ready to say, oh, don't get me started, and then you're going to complain to somebody, consider harnessing that energy that's inside. And then think about the circumstance that you're about ready to complain about and put that energy inward. So what do I mean by that? So if you're going to complain about something like, don't get me started about that person, right? Let's take that for an example. Instead of getting all riled up about that person, what they did, how they acted, how it affected you, etc., turn it inside a minute. And instead, use that energy to think of how you could change the circumstance, how you could respond differently, how you can have a better outlook on the situation, how you could help that person instead of just complaining about them. Usually that phrase, don't get me started, has a complaint that's going after it, So reframe your brain. Instead of looking for the complaint, take that energy and put it into something productive. Turn your thought around into something that's going to propel you forward instead of bringing you back into the situation. Because usually when you start complaining about something, right, we're thinking about something that happened in the past. But we can't change the past anymore. It's the past. It's done. And your perception of what happened, that is just that. It's your perception. Maybe the person you're complaining about didn't perceive it the way that you did. There's a mind-blowing thought. I've had to think about that sometimes, that I see a situation a certain way, and then when I go back and I talk to that person, they're like, well, I didn't see it that way. So maybe, just maybe, the way you perceived it, and I'm not saying that you're lying in your brain. I'm just saying that our brains see what they see when they see it, and that sometimes it's not what the other person sees. So I guess my point is, the small step for today is to catch yourself when you're about ready to say that phrase of don't get me started. Turn it around and think for a minute about that thing that you were just about ready to rant about, right? And then see what you can do about it. See if there's something that you can change. And instead of going backwards, take your moment, capture your moment, and figure out how to make it better to project it into the future. All right. Well, thank you for joining me again for another Wednesday Wisdom. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, share it with a friend. If you have not, it's a really big deal to podcasters, whether you listen to mine or others. Those 5 stars mean a lot. So take a fraction of a second as soon as this is done and hit those 5 stars. And if you can, leave a review. Even if it's a short one, it's still a review. And I am grateful for each and every one of you. All right, friends, go ahead and make today awesome. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, check out my website, personalcoachfinder.com, and find someone who can help. Remember, life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by choice. Take small steps today and make your life awesome, friends.